It's Sam. I'm going to talk to you today about the upcoming lunar eclipse. It's a big one on December 21st, 2010. We have a couple things. This is the chart of the eclipse. This is where the planets will be. And there's a lot of things going on, so I'm going to try to not make this video be like 2 hours long because I could talk for a long time about this one. So, you see, when we have this eclipse, it's going to happen on December 21st, 2010, early in the morning here on the west coast. We have Mercury, Sun, Rahu, and Pluto in Mullah Nakshatra down here in Sagittarius. And Mercury, Sun, Rahu, and Pluto are all in Mullah Nakshatra in Sagittarius, and Mars is in the next nakshatra, which is called Purva Phalguni, called Purva Ashara. But anyway, it's in Sagittarius. So we have all these planets in Sagittarius. We also have the moon is up here in Mrigashira Nakshatra in Gemini, and Ketu, south node, is in Ardra Nakshatra. A few things that are also really important about this chart. You see, I have next to Venus, I have a star. Next to Jupiter, I have a star. It's because Jupiter and Venus are both strong. They're in their signs, the signs they rule. And that's really important because when a planet is in the sign that it rules, then it's strong, it's powerful. It's like, you can look at the planets as sort of landlords. You know, they own different parts of real estate in the sky. They each, except the sun and moon, which only rules one sign each. The sun rules Leo, moon rules Cancer. The other planets rule two signs. So it's like two areas of the sky, and when they're in those signs, it's like they're living in their own house, you might say. When you're in your own house, you can get a lot done, right? You have all your stuff around. You're not being, sort of lorded over. And so when planets are in their own sign, they're operating in their own environment. They're literally in their own element. And so the things that they maintain and take care of and activate, both as a house ruler and as what's called a karaka, or a natural indicator, tend to flourish and are very wise, and a lot of lessons come and a lot of insight comes during that time that the planet is in that environment, when it's in its own element. So even if there's difficulties and stresses and problems, which is always going to be the case, when the planet is in its own area, in its own sign, we're going to learn more at that time about that thing. At least that's the potential. Of course, and especially if it's powerful, like, for instance, in your birth chart or whatever, that energy will be an energy of intelligence anyway. And so when it's in its own element, you'll be able to really learn a lot at that time. So the fact that Jupiter and Venus are both in their own signs right now and during this eclipse shows that for the most part, even though there might be some real difficulty, there's an environment of wisdom and of intelligence operating. Venus and Jupiter are the two Brahmins, the two teachers. Venus teaches us, stated simply, Venus teaches us really how to get along here on Earth, mainly with other people. Venus is the planet that governs adult relationships. That includes romantic relationships, but also just the give and take and the compromise necessary for us to get along with each other as adults. For instance, the sun and moon actually are responsible for sort of parental interactions, like a parent and a child, selfless love, selfless bigger themes like that, but two egos interacting with each other. Venus is the best planet for that. That's what Venus is here to teach us, that when you get two egos involved, there needs to be mutual respect. There needs to be a sort of universal, gentle sharing and accommodation and willingness to satisfy another and make another happy, equal to our own happiness. That's what Venus brings. Teaches us how to interact in the world, navigate the world of desires. The teacher of the Asuras in the Vedas. The Asuras are basically our desires for what we want. I want this. And that can be something that activates a very cruel energy in us. That's what the Asuras are. And it's okay. It's not a judgment. That's the nature that makes us rebel against convention and whatnot. So Venus teaches us, Venus is the teacher of the Asuras, so that as we're navigating those desires and we're activating those things we want, we learn how to do it properly with manners, decorum, and thinking of others as well, and considering the consequences of our actions and things like that. So Venus is the teacher of life on earth, of the Asuras, and Jupiter of the Devas. Jupiter's the teacher of the Devas, which is the bigger forces in us that wants to know the truth, that wants to leave the world, that wants to connect with something much bigger than just the world of desires, the world of happiness, the world of pleasure, and all that stuff, which is what Venus rules. So Jupiter is about philosophies, teachers, gurus, things like religion, and the big purpose and meaning of our life. And Jupiter is the teacher of those things. So he teaches us how to transcend the world. Basically, Venus teaches us how to live in the world of choices, desires, people. Jupiter teaches us how to rise above it, transcend it, look to something much bigger than just the world of desires and what we want. Neither is better or worse. They all have their divine expression. But these are the two teachers, the two Brahmins, and they're both powerful. So in the midst of what I'm going to say next, remember, there's an environment of wisdom, growth, teaching that is pervasive during this time. This is why even though there's a lot of intensity right now, because we already have these planets lined up here. We already have a Mercury retrograde near Rahu, Sun, Mars, Pluto. All this stuff is already lined up this way. We haven't had an eclipse yet, but it's preparing for that. Actually, the sun is not here yet. The sun is in Scorpio right now as I record this on the 13th of December. But we have this intensity going on here. So even in the midst of all this intensity right now, we feel like we're learning a lot. We feel like, well, it's not that bad. We feel like there's a lot of wisdom coming to us, and there is, because these two Brahmins are very powerful. Jupiter's in Pisces, which is connected to that mystical source. It's much more mystical than it is religious. Jupiter also rules Sagittarius, which is very religious. And that's why we're having a lot of these philosophical, religious battles, not just religion, but also law. Because law is kind of like the prevailing philosophy of life on earth and culture. So Jupiter's related to law as well, like man-made law here on earth, and also God-made law, or dharma and righteousness, which is what makes us seek a higher purpose. And that quality of law and righteousness, whether it's man-made law on earth or God-made law, which becomes religion, that quality of Jupiter is related to Sagittarius. Very much about, this is right, this is wrong, you need to do what's right. That's Jupiter, that's Sagittarius. And it gives us a feeling of hope and inspiration. The other quality of Jupiter is very mystical, and that's Pisces. Western astrology says Pisces is ruled by Neptune. Traditional astrology, before Neptune was discovered and back into the mist of time, Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces, Jupiter the mystic. And this inner expansion toward the supreme possibility of merging our individual self with the cosmic self. That's Jupiter, as it operating through Pisces. So Jupiter's in Pisces right now. So even in the midst of all of this man-made law, wrangling, these legal things going on, and all of the kind of fight for our, for our legal foothold in the world and government, in the midst of it, there's a lot of mystical opening where we're like looking for something bigger and more transcendent. And Venus is here in Libra, bringing it down to people, realizing that we have to implement these things in the context of relationship, not just romantic, but with each other, that we have to respect each other's ideas, ideals, hopes, and bring a sense of decorum and civility into discussions, and also create something beautiful. This is why Venus is the teacher of the Asuras because it brings about a sense of beauty and gentleness into the world, into our interactions. So there's a desire to create something beautiful now because Venus is in Libra, and especially create something beautiful and harmonious between each other and between people. So we're going to have a eclipse here on the solstice. Now, I want to just point something out. The moon is going to be in a nakshatra called Mrigashira, and it's going to move into Ardra up here. And this is where the eclipse is going to happen. This is why we're having the eclipse, because the moon is moving opposite the sun. So it's going to happen around 6 degrees, about around 5 degrees of Gemini and Sagittarius. The moon is moving from Mrigashira to Ardra nakshatra, and the sun, Mercury, Rahu, and Pluto, Mercury, Sun, Rahu, Pluto, are in mullah nakshatra over here. Now this axis, this mullah and Ardra axis, it's actually around 6 degrees of sidereal Gemini and Sagittarius, is the galactic plane. This is the galactic plane. Our orientation in space, our solar system goes this way relative to the center of our galaxy. Our galaxy sits here. You know, our galaxy is like a ball of stars, like a jumble of stars, and then there's the plane called the galactic plane. Our solar system goes this way relative to that galactic plane. Okay, it travels this way. When we reach this point in the orbit, actually it's like this. When we reach this point in the orbit, when the Earth is over here, the Sun is over here, we're looking back into the center of our galaxy. That's what this plane is. So what I just showed you, the galactic plane here, and our orbit this way, the Earth being here, the Sun being here, and the center of the galaxy here, and the plane of the galaxy here, that's what we're looking at when we have this eclipse. The opposite is the case when we have this same situation, but the Earth is here, the Sun is here, and we're looking this way. That's what happens on the summer solstice when we're looking out away from the center of the galaxy, and the Earth is closer to the center of the galaxy than at any other time, and in the galactic plane. I can't teach you astronomy here, but this is basically what's going on. Those of you who understand can get an idea of what I'm saying. So this eclipse is happening on the galactic plane. This is the same reason that the Mayan calendar is ending now, because what's happening is at the same time we're having the solstice, which if you notice this date, December 21st, that's the solstice date, which means that's the first day of winter. It's when the sun appears to change direction in the sky. The sun keeps getting darker and darker, less and less sunlight in the northern hemisphere, less and less sunlight, less and less, less and less, and then there's a switch, and then the sun starts to rise in the sky, and that switch is what the winter solstice is. It's when the sun changes direction in the sky from our vantage point. That's also happening on this day within hours after this eclipse. The reason this eclipse is so powerful is because we have all of these things happening almost at the same time. Now, the reason it was important to the Mayans is because this only happens once every 25,600 years, that we have the sun changing direction at the same time that the Earth is, or at the same time that it's going through the galactic plane. This is why the Mayan calendar ends at this time, because this is very significant, and the center of the galaxy was very significant to all ancient cultures as the source of life, spiritual power, and awareness. It was called Hunabku by the Mayans, and it's called the Vishnu Nabi by the Indians. They have a myth that says Lord Brahma came from the navel of Lord Vishnu, which indicates this galactic center, galactic plane phenomena. So what I'm saying is, not only is this the day and the moment that the sun changes direction in the sky, but we're having an eclipse on that day, which is amazing, because then the sun, moon, and earth are all lining up at the same point in space, which is what an eclipse is. The reason eclipses are so powerful is because the sun, which is Paramatman, or the self, the origin of selves, the supreme self within us is what the sun is in a cosmic sense. It's the source of power, the oneness, the one power of everything. Then the moon, which is the Jiva Atman, or the mind, the manas, the emotional, individual reflection of consciousness, of pure consciousness, which means it's how we experience ourselves as a divine being, comes through the moon. And then the earth, which is our body, our physical presence. We're here incarnated with a physical body, and that comes from the earth. It's made of the elements of the earth. Those three things, body, mind, and soul, all line up in the same trajectory. That only happens a few hours per year. People say, well, eclipses happen all the time. You know, our mind is like we don't use a lot of discrimination often when we think. Just because we hear about eclipses a couple times a year doesn't mean it happens all the time, you know. We go to the bathroom all the time. We go to the bathroom maybe 10 times a day. Okay, that would be sort of like all the time. We have an eclipse a few hours per year. That's it's very limited. They happen very rarely relative to regular time. A few hours per year. We have 2 eclipses per year. They last a few hours each. So this is a very narrow and specific conjunction of singularities happening at right around the same time. The sun changes direction. You know, we use this day, December 21st, but it's really an instant. It's like flipping a switch. We can say, well, this is the solstice day. It happens on that day. It actually happens in a second. This just happens to be the day. It's like flipping a light switch and saying, what day did you flip on the light switch? Well, a day is really a long measurement of time to say flipping a light switch, which takes a half a second. The same thing with this. It's an instant. The sun is getting darker, then it changes and gets lighter. It just happens on this day in the Gregorian calendar. But it's a moment that occurs. And these moments, like this moment of the eclipse, which is a few hours, and this moment switching of the sun, are happening almost exactly at the same time relative to how time actually unfolds. This event is much more significant than December 21st, 2012, which is the big day that you hear about with 2012. The reason that day is important, again, is because of the same phenomena, because that's the day that the sun changes direction in the sky, and it's happening as the sun is moving through the galactic plane, and the Mayans, according to calculations, said it was going to happen on this day, according to our reverse engineering of the calendar. I will tell you this, though. I'm going to say this flat out as a matter of public record. If I were to argue the point, which I'm not because I'm not a Mayan scholar, but I would say that this date, December 21st, 2010, is much more significant than anything that's happening astronomically and therefore astrologically on December 21st, 2012. No question. There's no eclipse on December 21st, 2012. An eclipse is an absolute rare phenomena, and it's a moment where body, mind, and soul line up at the same time. That's what it is, in a cosmic sense. What this means to us here on Earth, it's a great time of meditation and reflection, because these qualities of body, mind, and soul get lined up at the same time. Whereas they're usually scattered. The sun is somewhere, so your soul nature is in this realm, the moon is in this realm, and your body is in another realm. They all come together when we have the eclipse. Bang. And the shadows come and negate outer experiences. So this is why there's a tendency to say that they're difficult, and they're often feared because of outer implications. But of course, inner implications, anytime you have any kind of concentration of power, which always has a capacity to be difficult, also has a capacity, an equally strong capacity for inner transformation. This is when chaos can ensue externally but to be established in the midst of chaos is enlightenment. There's a big, big spiritual potential with this eclipse, but also a big potential for external chaos. And I don't just mean this day, I mean these times right now. Because we have all these planets in mullah nakshatra. Mullah means root, and it's to uproot difficulty, uproot ignorance, uproot darkness. In the Vedas, mullah was ruled by a deity called Nirati. That's the Vedic deity, and it literally means calamity, and it's the one deity that they were really afraid of. They're like, I don't want this one around. Do what you can, Indra, to protect me from Nirati. And have all these planets in mullah nakshatra on this eclipse, which is literally, mullah is the galactic plane. It's the galactic core. That source of power and the root source of our power. This is why mullah means root, and it literally is related to roots as well. And you see there's all these battles being waged over root issues right now, like our money and even things like food. All these battles over food, legislations in Europe that will outlaw herbal medicine in 2011, and they're trying to push through laws in the United States regulating food, and literally companies like Monsanto that produce seeds are at the heart of these kinds of aggressive battles that we're waging, all happening in mullah, which is roots, where we plant something in the soil and it grows. And if it's not what we want to grow, we need to uproot it. Like if you have poison ivy in your yard and you just trim the leaves, it's going to grow back. If you want to get rid of it, you need to uproot it. That's what mullah is, uprooting things. It might be uprooting something that's good. So this is why we need to fight the good fight these days, and all these planets in Sagittarius is making us aware of that. One of them being Mars, which is the planet of courage, and the enthusiasm to fight for something that's worthwhile, but we have to remember to be civil, and we have the capacity to do that now with Venus in Libra, and also keep our mind on what's more eternal, which is Jupiter in Pisces. Something to let you know also about this transit of the moon going from Mrigashira into Ardra. 3 of the biggest tragedies of the last 10 years or so happened when this exact transit took place. When the moon went from Mrigashira into Ardra. That's when we had 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, and the tsunami in Asia. Mrigashira into Ardra. This is just a matter of information. This is why I'm saying I'm not predicting necessarily that it's going to be this huge tragedy, but there's a lot of historic astrological indicators here. This is a very specific thing. You might be saying, okay, well, so what? You know, that could happen anytime. We're talking about a 1/27th portion of the sky here. We're not talking about even an astrology sign, which is 1/12 of the sky. We're talking about 1/27th portion. It only passes through here one day a month. Is it going to make this change? And every time, it was when the moon was in Mrigashira, it started, and then when it went into Ardra, there was devastation. For example, the terrorists got on the airplanes and flew them into buildings when the moon was in Mrigashira in Gemini, not Mrigashira in Taurus, Mrigashira in Gemini, flew them into buildings, and then the buildings collapsed and everybody started dying when the moon went into Ardra. Hurricane Katrina, there was a big storm in the Gulf of Mexico when the moon was in Mrigashira. The moon goes into Ardra and it floods New Orleans, overruns the dams, and people start dying. The tsunami, there was an earthquake in the ocean when the moon was in Mrigashira. Then when the moon went into Ardra, a tsunami ensued and started killing a bunch of people. Ardra literally means flood. The symbol is a teardrop, and also it's related to flooding. It's the flood of emotion. Not just emotion or not just water that devastates land masses and kills people, or a flood of debris falling from the sky after airplanes hit buildings. It's related to a deluge of matter, you might say, often watery matter. But it's also the flood of love and passion and truth that can overrun the logic, the paradigm of mental chatter and attachment to fiction that we think is so real. That's this nakshatra. When the moon is here, what's going to happen is when we're looking at the sun that day, we're looking back into the center of the galaxy. Remember I showed you this. Literally oriented toward our galaxy, we have the galactic core here, the galactic plane here, and our solar system moving this way. What happens is the Earth is here, the sun is here, and the moon is here. Okay? This is what a full moon is. The sun is on one side of the Earth, and the moon is on the other. So when we're looking at the sun that day, we're looking right back into the center of the galaxy. When we look at the full moon that night, we're looking straight away from the center of the galaxy. This nakshatra, ardra, which is the one that the moon goes into later, by the time the moon is in ardra, the sun will have changed directions. This shift that happens on the solstice, because this is a solstice day, the moon will have gone into ardra, and we're looking then straight away from the center of our galaxy. This nakshatra is ruled by Lord Rudra, who was the early incarnation of Lord Shiva. And Rudra was the fierce form of Shiva that destroyed and killed and restored righteousness. It's also the early version of Shiva who cried and cried and cried and cried when his wife immolated herself on Daksha's sacrifice because righteousness wasn't upheld, and then sought revenge and all of these other things. So it's also this flood of emotion. People who have a lot of planets in ardra actually tend to cry a lot. It brings a lot of tears, but healthy tears because it's very passionate and very much about righteousness and restoring truth. There's a lot going on here right now. This is a huge eclipse. This is a little longer than I thought it would be, but there's a lot to say. It could be twice as long, but it's not going to be. I'm going to wrap it up here. But this is a very transformative time right now. And I'm going to say this. My feeling is this is, like I said, I'm not a Mayan scholar, so I don't exactly know how they found the date that indicates 5,125 years later, the calendar would end on 2012. But this is why it's 2012, because they counted backwards and said this is when it's supposed to begin. And it's literally a 5,125 year cycle. It's actually 5 of those is the long count calendar, which adds up to 25,600 years, the length of precession, which means the last time that the sun went through the galactic plane as it was changing direction was 25,600 years ago. This is a very unique phenomena that we're living through right now. So it's broken up into 5,125 year cycles, and they're saying it culminates in December 21st, 2012. What I'm saying, and it's arbitrary, 2 years, it's very arbitrary. What I'm saying is this: nothing on December 21st, 2012 is going to be nearly as significant as this. December 21st, 2010, we're having an eclipse. So not only is the sun going through the galactic plane as it changes directions, within hours of that, we're having an eclipse with both luminaries also on the galactic plane, with sun, moon, and earth on the galactic plane as the sun is within hours of changing direction. Nothing like that's happening on December 21st, 2012. So if there's transformation, if this is a transformational time, and it is, people that say, oh, 2012 is just a lot of dumb hype and stuff, they've said that forever, blah, blah. If this is what's in your mind, you're wrong. Just say it flat out. It is not like that. This is a real thing happening. Look around you. Are things changing? Hello? It's been happening for many, many years, because it takes the sun 70 years to process 1 degree of ecliptic longitude. So for the last at least 30 years, the sun has been in this transitional period of when it changes direction, it's in the galactic, it's passing through the galactic plane. The implications of this is that it will shift. Whenever this exactly started and whenever it's going to exactly end is up for debate. We're not exactly sure, but it's right around now, sometime around now. There's a lot of factors that come into play, but you have to realize these are very transformative times as these 4 levels of the Mayan calendar click into place and reset. That's what they were talking about, and that's what the times we're living in right now. So, but nothing on December 21st, 2012 is going to be as astronomically or astrologically significant that day or that moment that the sun changes direction, which is why that's the day. Nothing is going to be as astronomically significant as what's happening in a couple weeks, in a week and a half from now. Or about a week, because this is the 13th. So, I hope this helped you. Leave some comments, let me know what you think. Hope this wasn't too long. I hope you enjoyed it.